Welcome everybody to our Nomasis webinar. My name is Nadine and I'm pleased to introduce to you Patrick Trevisan. Patrick is mobile security consultant at Nomasis and will be presenting today. Today's webinar is about Zero Trust. The session lasts about 30 minutes. Please notice that during the presentation your microphones will be set to mute. You may post questions during the session through the chat function or ask them at the end of the presentation directly. The questions will then be answered by Patrick. Now I'd like to hand over to Patrick. Please, Patrick.
Thank you very much, Nadine, and also from my side, welcome everybody to today's Nomasis webinar about modern zero trust security. As you might know, we at Nomasis, we are also always curious about side projects or security architecture. So we're not only having outlook on or a look on the mobile world, but also what is happening around the mobile world. And one of those points was the zero trust, and we are pleased to share our knowledge about zero trust with you also because Microsoft, Azure, and also Mobile Iron have actually built in the zero trust model into their infrastructures. So, what is zero trust? When I first saw the main message, so trust no one, I was a bit puzzled. Also a colleague of mine this week, he said, sounds scary. No one, trust no one, even not your employees, even not your devices. So what does this mean exactly? This is what we are going to elaborate together today. But basically, remember, trust no one. This is really the key message of zero trust. So what is zero trust? Zero trust is not a product. It is actually a security architecture blueprint. It is also an IAM, so an identity and access management strategy. And it was developed in 2010 already by John Kinderwag. The main difference between or the main two differences between zero trust and perimeter security, which we do today, is actually zero trust is a data-centric access approach. It has a data-centric access approach and not a network access approach. So that means users don't get access to networks, they get access to data. And it also includes a context-based access. Means not only your password, and other words to password later on, but not only you cannot only access with your password or with one factor, you have to comply with many other factors. So basically, there is no baseline trust towards customers, employees, and applications. So again, trust no one. We don't trust customers, we don't trust employees, and we don't trust applications forehand. And also not internally and not from external. So that means it doesn't matter where the person sits or from where he accesses the data, we just don't trust him in first place. Every data access is evaluated and monitored. That means, again, we don't give access to the network and everything that is in this network can be accessed with the same access. No, every time a user wants to access data, he is again evaluated and we have a constant monitoring. That means what is the user doing? Which data is he accessing? What is he doing with the data? From where does it come? With which device? And so on. Let's maybe shortly turn the game. So what happens if we don't use zero trust nowadays? What are the risks? So first of all, perimeter security is expensive and very complex to maintain. So all the firewalls and load balancers and access from this, access from that, Wi-Fi, etc. And it offers also limited protection because it can be a vulnerability could actually compromise your perimeter security, and you need to do something to eliminate the vulnerability. And from the point where there is a vulnerability to there where you take actions for the vulnerability, in this time frame, a potential protection might be not of use. Then usually no regular audits happen about access privileges. So someone starts to work in a company, we give him access rights. He's a long-standing guy, he says 10 years in the company, he switches from one department to the other, and he still has access rights he might not need anymore because he changed the department, he changed the function. Then of course, inconsistencies in administration of access rights. Again, someone has to proactively evaluate, are the access rights actually needed? Or when he changes department, do we need to, of course, give him new rights, but also remove the old rights? Then mostly we see that too many accounts have IT administration privileges. That's also something which is not very good. Then customer data or even internal data is spread over many network shares. So there is no overview on where is the data and how do people access that data or other apps. There is no data classification. So usually data is data. And many companies still don't differ between sensitive data, internal only data, etc., etc. And at the same time, of course, there is no reporting of storage places of that data. And last but not least, blind trust in password authentication. And zero trust is actually gets rid of all these risks you have, and at the same time, once built up, it will also facilitate the administration, the classification of the data. A few words to the password security in order to take other thoughts later on. So the top 10 passwords used in 2019 by users. Those things or such things. Then of course, oh no, I should have a letter in it. My personal opinion is I always use incorrect, because if I mistype a password somewhere, it will tell me your password is incorrect. No, of course, this is a joke. But again, you see, the top 10 passwords in 2019 are not very safe. Now, of course, you will say, yeah, but we have password policies. We need to have at least one capital letter, a combination between numbers, and maybe also a special character. Is this really enough? I don't think so. I've seen that a lot at customers, Post-its on with passwords somewhere. Of course, I still don't know where I can access with this password, but I could try. Or it is in the wallet. Also for credit cards or bank cards, the pins and stuff. And the very clever people, they do things like this. It's a bit more difficult to find it, but still, you see what my message is: passwords are not really secure. And we rely on the user's memory, first of all, and we rely on the user's inventive on how strong a password is. And I think in 2020, we could really get rid of passwords. And for that, I will introduce now into the strategy of Zero Trust. So Zero Trust is based on a two-pillar principle. So what do we need to do, or what are the key pillars to actually move towards Zero Trust? First of all, we have to identify the sensible data classification. This is, of course, in the beginning, it's a lot of work, but it will help you at the end to actually define how to access the data, and moreover, where to store the sensible data. Then second, once we know we did the data classification and we know where the data should reside, we will design the communication paths to the data. The second pillar is then the access to the data. So who accesses the data? When, where, why, and how does he access the data? And of course, what is done with the data? So this is the base two pillars for approaching a zero trust environment. Then once we go to the deployment, of course, we have to define the areas to protect. Again, we have a data classification. We stored the data based on our data classification on maybe more secure places or internal places or places which are accessible from external. Then we design the communication paths now in the real world. Then we start to build up the zero trust architecture, actually. So a lot of planning to do first, and then we can start to build up the zero trust architecture, which will also include the zero trust policies. So the policies that define what context or what prerequisites have to be met to access the data. And we have to set up network monitoring and maintenance. Now let's have a look what are the core elements of a zero trust architecture or infrastructure. Again, keep in mind, zero trust is not a product. So we have to build the zero trust model into our infrastructure, into our existing or our new infrastructure for zero trust. So one core element, of course, is the authentication. And again, every access is authenticated. And again, don't do it with passwords. Use SSO, single sign-on. Nowadays, this is possible on mobile devices, on computers anyway, but we have to stop rely on user passwords. And then, of course, because I said that some data is more sensitive than the other, we will also introduce conditional access. And I'm not talking here about Microsoft conditional access as a product, but again, as a strategy, conditional access. That means we will have adaptive factors depending on the risk evaluation of the data. So maybe, example, a user is internally and he wants to access data um, uh, which is not classified as high level secure or how can I say that? Yeah, it is not classified risky data, then maybe he can access it directly. But if we have maybe the same user that accesses the data from external and maybe from his home computer, we will request him to do an MFA, so a multi-factor authentication, to really make sure that he is the guy he pretends to be. The multi-factor authentication nowadays, of course, that can be biometrics, like we do on most of the mobile phones today with fingerprint, face ID, iris scan, etc. But it can also rely on traditional stuff like SMS token or even smart cards, secure token, etc. So the core element of zero trust is authentication. Then, of course, the other core element is the identity and access management. We have to have rules for identities and access. We have, again, based on our data classification and based on who is accessing from where and with which device to which data, we need rules for those people so that we can identify them first of all and also grant them access and tell them how to grant the access. Then, of course, we are using the IAM for the authentication of known identities. Unknown identities That's maybe if you have an internet page like we have, www.nomasis.ch. There we don't need any authentication because it's public. But as soon as you need to give access to some data which is inside your network or classified, sensitive, then of course we need to know the person. This will also help us to assign the appropriate access rights. Again, zero trust is not, it's already 10 years old. So there are famous adaptations of zero trust. Before moving into examples, I would like to show you there is Gartner. They are using Carta, and you see already the name, Continuous Adaptive Risk and Trust Assessment. So that's what I told you before, that we evaluate every access, but also we monitor every access. Google, with its Beyond Core context-based access. So if you log in with your Google account, you want to change it, maybe you need to use two-factor authentication, etc. This is all built in already today, and you're using it since many years without knowing it. Even myself, I didn't know about this. Then our two examples which will follow, of course, Microsoft, they implemented Zero Trust, naming it Zero Trust Security, and Mobile Iron also integrated Zero Trust, naming it Zero Trust Model. So let's have a look at Microsoft Zero Trust Security. Maybe this helped me to get the last bit of what I was missing before, after reading what I told you before. So as you can see on the left side, Microsoft is naming this signals. So this is actually our context. So we have a user which is in a specific location. We have a device, we have application, and we have real-time risks, of course, like vulnerabilities, jailbreaks, root access, and so on. And only if those signals are a combination that we trust, so it is a user we know, it is a device we know, it is an application we know, and there are no real-time risks, then he might have access. So he tries to access, and then we verify every access attempt. Either we allow access, or if he doesn't have the appropriate access rights, we can block the access. Or maybe we know the user, but it's not the correct device. Maybe because let's talk about mobile device, it's not registered in Intune or in Microsoft Azure. Then we don't trust this. Or he has a jailbreak on it, or he has a malware on it. We don't give him access. Or maybe he's even using an application which we don't trust, because sometimes you have many apps or applications which allow you to access the same data, but we would like to know which application accesses our data, and that's why we have those policies in place. And the access verification has one more thing. So maybe we say, okay, we know the user, we know the device, we know the application, and there is no real-time risks. Okay, we allow the access. The same user uses the same application with no risks identified on a device we don't know. Then we could maybe uses his home computer to access his emails in the company. Then we could say, okay, in that case, you require MFA. And this is basically done for internal users, for external users, so customers or partners you have. And every time a user accesses an app internally, we evaluate. So the part in the middle is actually the conditional access. The signals, so the context has to match our policy. And then with conditional access, we additionally tell how he has to identify to the apps and data. And maybe the data resides on the same server, But one data is classified as high. That could mean, okay, when he tries to access again, oh, okay, sorry, high data classification. Now you need MFA anyway. Or again, if the data, if he doesn't have the access rights, then we can block the access again. But again, we don't give him the rights on the network, on whole the server, on the complete server. We evaluate every access attempt all the time. So this is a very simplified but helpful overview of a zero trust implementation. Actually, it looks like this. So this is components. Just see, I had the German word. Huh? Okay, I forgot to translate the the title. Anyway, it sounds the same. The components of Microsoft Zero Trust is actually this. And if you compare the two, I go back, you see we have again on the left side, we have all the signals. So users and risk, device, etc. In the middle, we have our heart with the conditional access. So is he allowed or does he need MFA and so on? And on the right-hand side, we have all the data. In this case, it's the Microsoft Azure Office 365 and so on. You can see below signal decision enforcement. This is actually how Microsoft is including this. Mobile Iron does it actually in a similar way. Of course, you need to register your device, so you need to provision your device in Mobile Iron, and then you are granted access. We protect the data on motion and on the device. We evaluate every time a user accesses through, let's say, the Mobile Iron Sentry or the reverse proxy, which is set up to access the internal data. Every time the reverse proxy will make sure that the device meets the policies, that the device is not jailbroken, that the user is registered, and so on. So we don't rely just on the user's credentials. We also rely on the device. Is it the device which is really registered? And is the device in compliance with our policies? And of course, left side, on the number 4, we enforce these security policies in order that the user cannot override them. Another view, also to see which components are involved. This is, of course, a bit depending if you are on-premise or in cloud or hybrid, but basically this shows all the components that are actually needed to, or which you use already today if you have Mobile Iron. So you see on the left side, we have the enablement. So a user needs to register the device needs to be in compliance. We enforce that, we give policies. Then maybe we have cloud, we access cloud, but also on-premise data. There we have conditional access ready. Of course, we offer single sign-on because there is really nothing worse that if a user needs to register a device and every time he starts a new app, he needs to enter his password again. So, of course, conditional access with single sign-on. We have many factors we can actually trust. So again, the user, the device, we know the device is registered, and so on. So this is actually how Mobile Iron is doing this. And think back now, in the very beginning, I said perimeter security versus zero trust. So perimeter would say, okay, the user has entered the correct password, access all what you see here, or all you have, and we don't evaluate and we do nothing. With zero trust, every time, every access is evaluated based on those contexts. And this makes it also much, much harder for attackers to meet all these requirements because we don't rely only on one factor, so the password, we rely on multiple factors. So we rely again on the device, we rely on the user, and we rely on the apps, which the user uses to access the data. Let's come to the conclusion. Again, this is a neutral assessment from our side. I tried to come up with some assessments like zero trust protects your data and not the network. I think this is clear to everybody. So every access to data and to classified data again is actually protected by an authentication that has to meet many signals. And based on that, I already said it before, offers a more effective protection against hackers and vulnerability, because they will have much more a hard time to meet all those requirements. I would even say it's almost impossible to meet all the requirements if you have them in place and you can actually rely on the access and you don't need to rely anymore on perimeter, firewall. Of course, you won't open your company and say, hey, come on. But again, you rely more on the fact that you trust a user based on what devices he's using and what apps. Then we've seen that passwords are unsafe, and additionally, actually I forgot that they require a high administrative attention. So if you ask your help desk or service desk members how many times they have to reset a password every day, I would say sometimes, especially after holiday seasons, that might be 50% of their job. And they could maybe do other things which would be more efficient for the users. And as we don't need any passwords anymore, if we do single sign-on and context-based sign-on, there is also no need to reset passwords anymore. Then the question that always came up, yeah, what do I need to do in Mobile Iron to use this, or in Microsoft, or in my existing infrastructure? Remember the two pillars, but basically, at least partially, the deployment of Zero Trust is already possible for your infrastructure, either on premise or in cloud, because it's not relying on components, it is relying on strategy. So saying, okay, from today on, we don't trust just the user with the password, but the policy you implement will also rely on the other factors for the access. And if you are using Microsoft Intune or Mobile Iron, you're actually already using Zero Trust. Good. That was all from my side. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to unmute yourself and ask it live. Or Nadine, have there been questions in the chat?
No, so far no questions.
Okay. Does anyone have an online question? Okay. Thank you very much again to having joined our webinar of today. I hope it was a bit interesting, and I hand over back to Nadine in that case.
Thank you very much, Patrick, and thank you for participating. If you have any further information or questions, please contact Nomasis at any time, and I wish you a nice evening.